The Lodestone had been chasing ghosts for 6 weeks. Commander Elara Vess stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the forward display paint a picture of silent ruin. The nebula outside was beautiful. A curtain of violet and copper gas shot through with veins of dying starlight. But the debris field that drifted through it told a different story. Elegant hulls, curved like the ribs of ancient sea creatures, tumbled in slow, graceful arcs. They were carved from a material that caught the nebula's glow and scattered it like stained glass. And every single one of them had been punched through by the same kind of weapon. Elara let her eyes trace the wounds, clean circles rimmed with something that looked almost like frost. The metal around each entry point had been flash-frozen, then shattered. Whoever had done this had not been trying to scare anyone. They had been methodical. "Science officer," she said. Her voice was steady, but she felt the weight of the graveyard pressing against the hull. "Give me something." Tam leaned over his console, his brow furrowed. He was young, barely 30, with the kind of face that looked like it belonged in a library rather than a deep space survey vessel. "I've cross-referenced the impact patterns against every known weapon signature in our database, Commander." He paused, then looked up. "Nothing matches, not even close." Elara turned to face him. "Consistency." "Perfect," Aris gestured at the display. Every single ship in this field was hit by the same type of weapon. Same yield, same thermal profile, same entry angle. It's like one gun did all of this. He shook his head. "The debris shows signs of extreme age. I'm estimating 200 years minimum." A heavy silence settled over the bridge. Elara could feel her crew's unease, a low hum of tension that vibrated through the recycled air. She understood it. This was not a battle. This was an execution. "Tactical," she said, turning to her right. Bennett Cruz was already watching the display, his dark eyes fixed on the drifting wreckage. He was a lean man, all sharp angles and quiet intensity, and he rarely spoke without thinking first. "Whoever they were," he said slowly, "they didn't stand a chance. No evasive maneuvers, no return fire, just slaughter." Elara nodded. "Keep scanning. I want to know if there's any active." The proximity alert cut her off. A single, piercing tone that made every muscle in her body lock tight. "Contact," Bennett said, his voice snapping into operational mode. "Something just appeared directly above us. I mean directly above us." Elara's eyes shot to the tactical display. A new icon had appeared, a massive shape that dwarfed the Lodestone like a whale drifting beneath a rowboat. The ship was beautiful. It was sleek, made of polished silver that seemed to drink the light around it, and its lines were elegant, almost organic. It matched the design language of the debris field exactly. "It's one of theirs," Aris whispered, "but it's intact, it's fully operational." "It's got us," Bennett said. His hands flew across his console. "They've locked onto us with some kind of tractor beam, gentle but solid. We're not going anywhere." Elara felt a cold spike of adrenaline, but she forced herself to breathe. First contact. This was what every commander dreamed of and what every commander feared. She opened her mouth to give an order, but before she could speak, the communication panel lit up. "Incoming transmission," Aris said. "Visual audio." "Put it through," Elara said. The main display shifted. The nebula and the debris field faded, replaced by the image of a being that stole the breath from her lungs. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with a frame that was slender and elegant. Its skin was pearlescent, shifting between shades of pale ivory and soft silver as it moved. Its face was angular, with high cheekbones and a jawline that seemed carved from marble. But its eyes were what held Elara. They were large, deep black pools that reflected no light, and they seemed to see through her, into her, past her. The being inclined its head. When it spoke, the voice was a synthesized melody, a harmony of tones that sounded like wind chimes shaped into words. "I am Factor Resh of the Praxis Merchant League," it said. "We offer our profound sorrow for the distress this encounter has caused you." Elara blinked. The translation was flawless, the tones soothing. But something about it felt rehearsed, like a speech delivered 1,000 times before. "I am Commander Elara Vess of the human vessel Lodestone," she said, keeping her voice calm. "We are a survey ship. We mean no harm." Factor Resh's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "We know this, Commander. Your vessel is small. Your technology is young. You stumbled upon a tragedy you were not meant to see." "The debris field," Elara said. "What happened here?" Factor Resh's expression did not change, but the melody of its voice dropped a note, becoming softer, sadder. "A conflict long settled, an old enemy now dealt with. The Praxis League values order above all else, Commander. Disorder must be corrected. Elara felt a chill run down her spine. The way it said corrected was too smooth, too final. We invite you aboard the unwavering account, Factor Resh continued. We offer reparations for your distress, dialogue, understanding. This is a moment of great opportunity, Commander, a bridge between our peoples. Elara's heart hammered in her chest. Hope flickered bright and dangerous, first contact, peaceful, diplomatic, everything humanity had dreamed of. But then Bennett Cruz spoke, his voice low and tight. Commander. She turned. He was staring at his console, his jaw set. The tractor beam hasn't released, he said. It's still holding us. Elara looked back at the display. Factor Resh was waiting, its dark eyes patient, its smile unchanging. Bennett met her gaze. Commander, he said, his tone flat and cold, that invitation does not sound like a request. The passage from the Lodestone to the Praxis vessel was a sensation of being pulled sideways through silk. Elara felt a moment of vertigo as the gravity tether released them, depositing her, Aris, and Cruz onto a polished floor that hummed with a frequency just below hearing. The air hit her first. It smelled of ozone and cold metal, sharp and clean, like a surgical theater that had never known blood. The corridor stretched before them, a tube of pale ivory material that glowed from within. There were no visible light sources. The walls themselves were the light. Factor Resh stood waiting, its hands clasped before it in a gesture that seemed patient and ancient. The being's skin shimmered with that same pearlescent quality Elara had observed through the view screen, and its black eyes held no discernible pupil or iris, just depthless pools that reflected the corridor's glow. Welcome aboard the unwavering account, Resh said, and its voice was warm, carefully modulated. I understand the transition can be disorienting. Please follow me. They walked through corridors that curved with organic precision. The walls occasionally rippled, displaying star charts or flowing script in a language Elara could not parse. Every surface was immaculate. Not a single scuff mark or fingerprint disturbed the perfection. Resh led them into a chamber furnished with low, cushioned seats arranged in a loose circle. In the center, a table rose from the floor, bearing 3 crystalline vessels filled with a liquid that swirled in slow, hypnotic patterns. I have taken the liberty of preparing refreshments, Resh said, gesturing for them to sit. The molecular structure has been adjusted to match your species' metabolic requirements. It will taste pleasant. I assure you it is harmless. Cruz looked at Elara. She nodded once. He sat. The liquid tasted like honey and mint and something floral she could not name. It was cold, then warm, then cold again as it went down. Aris drank with cautious sips, his eyes scanning the room, cataloging every detail. Resh settled into a seat opposite them, folding its long limbs with fluid grace. You have many questions. I will answer what I can. The debris field you discovered is a wound in our history, a tragic loss from a conflict that concluded 2 centuries ago. We do not speak of it often. It is a regrettable footnote. A footnote with 200 ships, Elara said. She kept her voice level. Destroyed by a single weapon type. Resh's smile did not waver. The Praxis Merchant League values efficiency, Commander, in war as in commerce, but that era is behind us. We are arbiters now, neutral facilitators of trade and knowledge across known space. We connect species, we do not conquer them. And the species that attacked those ships, Aris asked, what happened to them? They were reconciled, Resh said. The words carried a finality that discouraged further inquiry. The being tilted its head, studying them with those empty eyes. You are young. Your species has possessed faster-than-light travel for less than 2 decades, if my readings are accurate. Your drive is fascinating. Crude, certainly. Inefficient. It tears at the fabric of space-time rather than folding it, but fascinating. Elara felt the implicit judgment, but said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence often extracted more information than questions. Tell me about your territorial claims, Resh continued, leaning forward slightly. How many systems do you hold? What are your borders? Do you have established protocols for first contact? We're still figuring that out, Elara said. Humanity is new to this. We don't have a formal policy yet. Resh nodded as if this confirmed something it had suspected. Then allow me to offer a gift, a gesture of goodwill between our peoples. It pressed a hand against the table's surface. A panel slid open, revealing a small, crystalline disc the size of a coin. The disc floated upward, rotating slowly. This contains a database slice. basic galactic astrometrics, star charts of the major trade routes, communication protocols for several neighboring species, the aquatic tide song, the magnetic polarin, simple diplomatic phrases, cultural notes to avoid accidental offense. Eris reached for it, then stopped himself. "Why?" he asked. "Why give us this?" Resh's smile widened by a fraction. "Because the galaxy is large, Science Officer Tam, and the Praxis Merchant League believes in nurturing potential trade partners. You will need guidance. We provide it. There is no obligation attached to this gift. Consider it an investment." The generosity felt overwhelming. Elara wanted to trust it. The disk was a lifeline, a map through a wilderness they had barely entered, but something in her gut twisted. She had learned to trust that feeling. "I'd like to see more of your ship," she said. Resh rose smoothly. "Of course, a tour is fitting for new friends." The tour took them through hydroponic gardens where plants grew in geometric patterns, through laboratories where Praxis scientists worked with instruments Elara could not begin to understand, through observation decks that offered views of the nebula's violet and copper clouds. Then they reached a vast interior bay. Elara stopped at the viewing window. Below, in a chamber the size of a city block, small ships were being dismantled, insectoid in design with chitinous hulls and spiked protrusions. Worker drones moved with mechanical precision, cutting through the vessels like surgeons excising tumors. "Varath vessels," a Praxis aide said, appearing at Elara's elbow. The aide was shorter than Resh, with a similar pearlescent sheen but less refined features. "Being processed for debt reconciliation." "Debt reconciliation," Elara repeated. She watched a drone shear through a wing assembly, the metal crumpled like paper. "What debt?" Resh stepped beside her, its hands clasped behind its back. The Varath engaged in unauthorized expansion into Praxis-protected space. They ignored 3 formal warnings. They were offered terms. They declined. "So you're taking their ships?" "We are reclaiming resources," Resh said. Its voice remained warm, unhurried. "The Varath will be allowed to rebuild once the debt is satisfied. This is not punishment, Commander. This is equilibrium." Elara turned to face it. What did they owe? Resh's smile did not waver. Its black eyes reflected the lights of the bay below. "All things have a cost, Commander. Equilibrium must be served." The words settled into Elara's chest like a stone. Back on the Lodestone, the crew celebrated. Glasses were raised. Laughter echoed through the mess hall. They had made first contact. They had received a gift. They were no longer alone. Elara stood apart, watching them. Eris found her in the corridor outside her quarters. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Commander," he said, his voice was barely a whisper. "I analyzed the database." "And?" He held up a datapad. The screen displayed a waveform, faint, repeating, almost invisible against the noise. "It's not information," Eris said. "It's a diagnostic ping mapping our network, testing our firewalls, looking for vulnerabilities." Elara stared at the waveform. It pulsed with a steady, patient rhythm. She thought of Resh's smile, of the Varath ships being torn apart, of the debris field that had started all of this. "How long until it finishes mapping us?" she asked. Eris swallowed. "It's already done." Later, on the Praxis vessel Unwavering account, Factor Resh stood before a wall of shifting light. A network of fine threads, woven into the being's skull, carried data at near-light speeds. This quantum mindlink was the League's greatest tool for rapid communication. It hummed with a low thrum that felt like pressure behind the eyes. Resh reached out and the connection snapped into place. Prime Factor Kalen's presence was a cascade of cold logic. No warmth, no hesitation, just data. "Report," Kalen sent. Resh projected its findings in compressed packets of sensation and symbol. The human ship, the Lodestone, was a Tier 2 vessel at best. Its FTL drive was a crude wound in spacetime, leaking radiation. Its hull was solid but unremarkable. Their weapons were projectile-based, kinetic, laughably primitive. But the crew was the anomaly. Resh transmitted the scans taken during the tour. Neural plasticity readings that exceeded the Praxis baseline by 40%. Emotional response patterns that were erratic, violent, and unpredictable. Their combat history, retrieved from their own fragmented data archives, showed a species that fought not for territory or resources, but for reasons that defied logical projection. They fought for grief, for rage, for joy. "Variance is unacceptably high," Kalen sent, the thought carrying a note of disapproval. "They are unstable." Yes, Resh agreed, but that instability is a resource. Kalen paused. The quantum link hummed with the weight of calculation. Explain. Resh laid out the assessment. Humanity's primitive technology made them easy to manage. Their fractious social structure, riven by internal conflict, would make them easy to divide and absorb. But their neural plasticity, their capacity for adaptation, was a commodity the Praxis Merchant League had not encountered in centuries. They are not a peer, Resh concluded, but they are a potential client species, rich in resources, plentiful in labor. Their emotional volatility is a liability, but it can be weaponized. Kalen's projection shifted, the cold logic sharpened. Proceed with the standard offer. Full annexation under League protection, exclusive resource rights, cultural integration over 3 generations. Resh bowed its head. As you command. The link dissolved. Elara watched the screen flicker back to life. Resh stood in the same position, its expression unreadable. Commander Vess, Resh said, its tone now formal, the Praxis Merchant League extends to humanity an offer of protected status. You will be granted access to our trade routes, our astrometrics, our diplomatic protocols. In exchange, the League will hold exclusive rights to all resources within human-claimed space. Your culture will be integrated into the League framework over a period of 3 generations. Elara felt her stomach tighten. And if we decline? Resh's black eyes seemed to deepen. The graveyard you found is 2 centuries old, Resh said, its voice soft. 200 ships, 1 weapon. Those who refused the League's offer did not survive to regret it. The gravity tether hummed. The Lodestone was not going anywhere. Elara stared at the terms on her screen. The language was clean, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth, protected status, exclusive rights, cultural integration. She had seen contracts like this before. Back on Earth, corporations used the same language when they bought out smaller companies. Friendly at first, then firm, then hostile. They were not being welcomed. They were being purchased. Cruz's voice broke the silence. Commander, the tether is still active. We can't disengage. Elara looked at Aris. The science officer's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. Elara, Aris said, his voice barely a whisper. The tide song. The logs Resh showed us. The species that accepted the League's protection, they were gone within 3 generations, not dead, just absorbed. Their culture, their identity, their autonomy, dissolved. Elara turned back to the screen. Resh was waiting, patient, certain. Commander, Resh said, I advise you to accept. The alternative is unpleasant. Elara's jaw tightened. The grief anchor in her chest, the one she had carried since the day she watched her home colony burn in the last war on Earth, pulsed with cold fire. She had not survived that war to be sold. Factor Resh, she said, her voice steady. I need time to review the terms. Resh tilted its head. You have 1 cycle. At the end of that cycle, I will require your answer. The transmission ended. The bridge fell silent. Elara stared at the crystalline disk on her armrest. The gift, the gesture of goodwill, it had never been a gift. It had been a down payment. Commander Elara Vess had barely settled back into the command chair of the Lodestone when the transmission arrived. The crystalline disk Resh had gifted them sat on the armrest, inert and silent, but the message on the main screen was anything but. Factor Resh stood at the center of the view, its pearlescent skin catching the bridge's dim emergency lighting. Its black eyes held no warmth now. The gracious host was gone. In its place stood a negotiator. Commander Vess, Resh said, its voice a low, resonant hum. My prime factor wishes to speak with you directly. Please hold. The screen went black. Elara exchanged a glance with Cruz. That tone, Cruz muttered, his hand hovering near his console. He's not asking. The screen flickered and a new figure appeared, taller than Resh, more severe. Its skin was the same pearlescent silver, but its eyes held something harder. This was Prime Factor Kalen. Commander Vess, Kalen said, its voice a flat, resonant hum. I have reviewed the offer extended by Factor Resh. It stands. You will accept protected status under the Praxis Merchant League. You will grant exclusive resource rights. Your culture will be integrated over 3 generations. You have 1 cycle to decide. Elara's hands gripped the armrest. And if we refuse? Kalen's eyes did not blink. The graveyard you discovered is 2 centuries old, 200 ships, 1 weapon. Those who refused did not survive to regret it. The transmission ended. The bridge fell silent. Elara stared at the dark screen. The crystalline disc sat on her armrest, inert. It had never been a gift. It had been a down payment. The mood aboard the Lodestone had curdled into something thick and sour. Bennett Cruz stood at the tactical station, his knuckles white against the console's edge, staring at the schematic of the Praxis vessel that held them fast. "We could try a focused energy pulse," he said, his voice tight. "Catch them off guard." Aris Tam shook his head from the science station, his fingers dancing over a holographic display. "Their hull already has a profile on our weapons. Look." He pushed the data to the main screen. The first energy bolt they had fired, a standard warning shot, had splashed against the silver hull like water on oil. The second, fired 3 seconds later, had been partially absorbed. The third would likely do nothing at all. Cruz swore under his breath. "Adaptive plating, it learns. Every shot makes the next one weaker." Elara Vess watched the readouts from the command chair, her face a mask of controlled calm. She had expected this. The Praxis were not sloppy. They had spent 2 centuries absorbing species, and they had not done it by leaving weaknesses in their armor. "Eris, try to jump us out," she ordered. Eris's hands moved faster. The low hum of the Lodestone's core shifted pitch, climbing toward the resonant frequency for a jump. Elara felt the familiar vibration in her teeth, the pressure behind her eyes that meant the drive was spooling up. Then it stopped. The hum died, the vibration faded. The pressure behind her eyes vanished, replaced by a dull, sinking emptiness. "They've got some kind of field around us," Aris said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's like a cage. We can't get a lock." Elara closed her eyes. She had read about such devices in the intelligence briefs. This one anchored the ship to the local fabric of reality, making it impossible for their systems to operate. It was the perfect trap. "We are trapped," she said. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Cruz slammed his fist against the tactical console, the sound ringing through the bridge. No one told him to stop. Elara rose from the command chair. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, hollow and distant. "I need a moment. Maintain passive scans. Do not engage." She walked off the bridge without waiting for acknowledgement. The corridor stretched before her, the familiar gray metal walls of the Lodestone suddenly feeling like the walls of a tomb. Her quarters were at the end of the hall. She opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. The room was small, functional, impersonal. A bunk, a desk, a terminal, and on the desk, a single frame holding a photograph. She picked it up. Her fingers traced the edge of the frame, the glass cold against her skin. The photo showed 3 faces, a man with an easy smile, a woman with her hair pulled back, and a young girl with missing front teeth. They were standing in front of a shuttle, the sun setting behind them, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. That was the last picture ever taken of them. They had boarded the shuttle for a routine transport to the orbital station. A malfunction, a fire, no survivors. Elara had been on the ground, waiting for them. She had watched the streak of light as the shuttle burned up in the atmosphere. She had felt the impact through the soles of her feet, a distant, hollow thud that had echoed through the earth and into her bones. The grief had been a weight then, a constant, dull pressure on her chest that made every breath feel like a chore. She had carried it for years, letting it settle into the corners of her soul, a permanent tenant she had learned to live with. But now, staring at the photograph, the weight shifted. It was not sadness. Sadness was a fog, soft and suffocating. This was something else. A dark, furious energy that coiled in her stomach like a serpent. It was the part of her that had screamed into her pillow at night, the part that had punched a wall until her knuckles bled, the part that had wanted to burn the entire world down because the universe had taken everything from her. She had buried that part deep. She had locked it away in a vault of discipline and duty. But the vault was cracking. Elara set the photograph down and walked to the terminal. She began pulling up schematics, searching for an answer they had overlooked. She started with the fold space drive. The system operated on a principle of dimensional displacement, creating a shortcut between 2 points by pleating the fabric of spacetime. It required a precise, stable quantum state to function, a state the Praxis anchor field made impossible to achieve. Then she accessed the files on the neural mesh. The system was an experimental implant network installed just before the mission. The mesh was designed to let a pilot feel the ship, reducing reaction time by bridging the gap between human instinct and machine response. It was a high-risk system. Pilot burnout was a documented danger. The feedback loop could overwhelm a mind, drowning it in sensory data until the pilot's consciousness simply stopped. She scrolled through the technical readouts, her eyes scanning the diagrams. The mesh connected to the central nervous system through a series of subdermal implants. It read neural signals and translated them into ship commands. A one-way street, pilot to ship. But what if it didn't have to be? Her heart beat faster. The mesh was connected to the drive core. It monitored the core's status, feeding data back to the pilot. What if she reversed the flow? The thought was insane. The mesh was not designed to send data from the pilot to the core. It was not designed to accept emotional input at all. But the hardware was there. The connections were there. The only thing missing was the software, the bridge between the human mind and the machine's quantum state. She thought about the grief, the dark, furious energy that was coiling inside her. The Praxis understood technology. They understood physics, engineering, logistics. They understood how to absorb a species over 3 generations, how to use adaptive plating to render weapons useless, how to deploy a field to trap a ship. They did not understand a human mind weaponizing its own pain. Elara sat down at the terminal and began to type. Her hands moved with a speed born of desperation, pulling up the mesh's programming interface, finding the pathways that linked the pilot's neural signals to the ship's systems. She bypassed the safety locks, the governor protocols designed to prevent feedback overload. She rewrote the data flow, creating a channel that would allow her emotional state to be fed directly into the drive core. It was crude, it was dangerous, it would probably kill her. But it might work. She leaned back in her chair, her hands shaking. The photograph of her family stared up at her from the desk. The man with the easy smile, the woman with the practical hair, the girl with the missing teeth. They were gone. The Praxis wanted to take everything else. Elara stood up. She walked to the intercom and pressed the button. "Cruz, Aris, meet me on the bridge in 5 minutes. I have an idea." Her voice was steady, her hands were not. Commander Elara Vess stood in the Lodestone's small conference room. The air was stale and tasted of recycled metal. Across the table, Bennett Cruz and Aris Tam watched her with the wary stillness of men who already knew they would not like what they heard. She told them anyway. Elara laid out the plan in flat, deliberate sentences. She would feed raw psychomotive data, the unfiltered electrical signature of her own grief, directly into the ship's core. The neural mesh would translate her feelings into a waveform. That signal would be pushed into the fold space drive. It would create a broadcast the Praxis could not predict. Cruz's face went pale. He leaned forward, both hands flat on the table. "That's suicide, Commander. The core isn't built for that. You dump emotion into the system, it'll create a feedback loop. The Lodestone will tear itself apart from the inside." "It's the only variable they haven't calculated," Elara said. Her voice was calm, too calm. She heard it herself, like a stranger speaking through her mouth. "Resh's people scanned everything. Our weapons, our engines, our biology. They know what we are, they don't know what we feel." Aris rubbed his temples. His fingers trembled slightly. "The neural mesh is high risk even under controlled conditions. If you push grief through it, the psychological blowback could." "I know what it could do." Elara cut him off. She did not want to hear the clinical description of her own death. "I've read the schematics, burnout, psychic fragmentation, death." She let the words hang. "But it's the only move we have left." Cruz stood up. His chair scraped against the deck. "There has to be another way, a boarding action, a decoy, something." "There isn't." Elara met his eyes. "Their plating adapts to our weapons. Their field holds us in place. We are already dead, Bennett. The only question is whether we die on their terms or ours." Aris was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "The Praxis use quantum minds for logic processing, superposition-based systems that collapse under observation errors. If your signal is chaotic enough, emotionally derived, no operational purpose, their models might not parse it. It would be noise." "Beautiful, devastating noise," Elara whispered. She did not realize she had said it aloud until she saw Cruz flinch. He looked at her differently now, not with defiance, with something closer to fear. "You're not planning to survive this, are you?" Elara did not answer. She turned and walked toward the door. The neural mesh cradle was located in the engineering bay. It sat in a cramped alcove behind the ship's main reactor. The device looked like a medical table crossed with a sarcophagus. Thin metal cables lined the inside of the cradle. They were ready to connect to a human spine. The cradle had been installed as an emergency override system. No one had ever actually used it. The manual warned that prolonged connection caused permanent neural damage. Elara stripped off her uniform jacket and lay down on the cold surface. The cables were soft against her back, like sleeping on a bed of rubber hoses. She stared up at the low ceiling. A single light panel buzzed overhead. Aris appeared in the doorway. His face was drawn. "I've routed the neural bridge through the primary data node. When you're ready, the system will be live." "Thank you, Aris." "Don't thank me," his voice cracked. "I'm helping you die." "No," Elara closed her eyes. "You're helping me fight." She heard his footsteps retreat, then the hiss of the bay door ceiling shut. The cradle activated with a soft hum. Metal clamps secured her wrists and ankles. A cold gel spread across her lower back, preparing the interface points. Elara forced herself to breathe slowly. In, out, the hum grew louder, vibrating through her bones. Then the connection hit. It was not like anything she had expected. There was no sensation of wires entering her skull, no flash of light. Instead, the world simply expanded. She felt the cold of space pressing against the hull. She felt the low thrum of the reactor, a steady heartbeat in the ship's belly. She felt the gravity tether, a stubborn, grasping claw that held the lodestone in place. And then she felt something else, a presence, cold, insectal. It crawled through her systems like 1,000 tiny legs, probing, testing, reading. The Praxis diagnostic ping. They were scanning her ship again, cataloging every weakness. Elara gritted her teeth. She did not think about equations. She did not calculate trajectories or energy outputs. She thought about her family. The memory came unbidden, as vivid as the moment it had happened. The silent comm channel, the void where laughter used to be, the photograph on her desk, the one she stared at every night, her daughter's face, her husband's smile, the way the shuttle fire had bloomed in the darkness, silent and hungry, taking everything she loved. The neural mesh translated her grief. It did not process it as data. It processed it as a waveform, a pure negative resonance. The feeling of loss made into sound. The sound of a heart breaking, rendered in frequencies the ship could understand. Elara pushed it into the fold space drive. For a moment, nothing happened. The drive was designed for logic, for calculations and coordinates. It did not know what to do with grief. It sat there, confused, trying to parse the input. Then it reacted. The drive did not jump. It did not fold space or create a corridor. Instead, it emitted something else entirely. A localized chronodrift. A bubble of mangled time formed around the lodestone. Inside that bubble, seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes bent into hours. The laws of physics stuttered and skipped like a broken recording. On the Praxis bridge, Factor Resh observed the sudden spike in energy. It was impossible. Their readings showed no tactical logic, no combat pattern, no operational purpose. The signal was chaotic, raw. It was the shape of a scream given mathematical form. Resh's quantum mind logic systems tried to parse it. They collapsed. The superposition of probabilities could not hold. The signal was too alien. It contained no sequence, no intention, no logic. It was noise. Beautiful, devastating noise. For 3 seconds, the Praxis predictive models went blind. Their sensors saw nothing. Their calculations produced nothing. Their perfect, ancient systems simply stopped. Elara felt the chronodrift ripple through her. Time bent around her like a river changing course. She floated in the space between heartbeats. In that impossible gap, she heard her daughter's voice. A laugh, a memory, a ghost. She held on to it. And the lodestone burned bright in the darkness, screaming with the sound of a mother who refused to be silent. The 3-second blind spot was a gift, and Bennett Cruz intended to spend every millisecond of it. His hands moved before his conscious mind caught up, slamming the weapon's console into manual override. The safety locks screamed at him through the interface, red warnings flashing across his display. He ignored them all. Come on," he muttered, his fingers dancing across the touchplate. The lodestone's cannons were designed for precision, directed energy pulses, tight beams, surgical strikes. The Praxis adaptive plating had already learned those patterns, calibrated itself to neutralize them within fractions of a second. So Cruz did not aim at the ship. He aimed at the empty space beside it, behind it, above it. He fired every weapon in a scattered, chaotic barrage, spraying fire into the void like a man throwing gravel at a window. The first shots went wide, vanishing into the nebula's violet haze. The second volley scattered in a cone of light, striking nothing. But the third spread caught the edge of something invisible, something that shimmered and bent reality where it touched. The fold space anchor projector. It had a physical tether to this dimension, a point where impossible energies stabilized into something the universe could tolerate. Cruz had no idea where that point was. He was guessing, gambling, praying. His fourth shot connected. A section of empty space rippled, and for a single glorious instant, Cruz saw it. A distortion, a shimmer, a crack in the fabric of reality. The anchor's stability field wavered. The gravity tether that held the Lodestone prisoner stuttered, lost its grip, and for one heartbeat they were free. "Now, Elara," Cruz whispered, "do it now." Deep in the engineering bay, Elara Vess felt the shift. She was drowning in her own grief, lost in the memory of fire and screaming and the faces of her children vanishing into heat. The neural mesh had opened her like a wound, and all the sorrow she had buried for 8 years was pouring out, raw and unguarded. But then she felt it, a flicker, a weakness. The Praxis presence that had been probing her mind, cold and clinical, suddenly pulled back. Something had changed. Elara did not think. She did not plan. She did not calculate the odds or consider the consequences. She simply reached down into the depths of her pain and found something else waiting there. Rage. It had been hiding beneath the grief all along, coiled like a serpent, patient and venomous. The condescension in Resh's voice, the trap they had walked into, the graveyard of 200 ships destroyed by a weapon that had never even been described to them. The quiet corporate certainty that humans were easy prey, manageable assets, things to be purchased and absorbed and forgotten. She grabbed that rage with both hands and pulled. The neural mesh screamed as her emotional state shifted. The sorrow waveform collapsed, and something new took its place. A pulse. A focused, white-hot fury that did not mourn the past but demanded the future. Elara channeled it into the fold space drive, not as a signal, not as a cry for help, as a weapon. The Lodestone's crude FTL drive had been designed by engineers who thought in terms of mathematics and physics. They had never accounted for a pilot who thought in terms of loss and vengeance. The drive's systems tried to interpret the emotional surge, failed, and then did something no Praxis engineer would have predicted. It did not fold space. It punched through it. The jump lasted less than a second, but it felt like eternity. The Lodestone shuddered violently, its hull groaning against forces it was never meant to withstand. Alarms blared in every compartment. The lights flickered and died, then came back as emergency systems kicked in. Cruz was thrown from his chair, slamming into the bulkhead hard enough to crack a rib. Tam, who had been monitoring from the science station, felt his teeth rattle in his skull as the ship twisted through dimensions that had no name. And then silence. The Lodestone hung in normal space, its systems smoking, its hull scarred but intact. Behind it, a wound in reality bled distorted radiation into the void, a scar that would take centuries to heal. Cruz pulled himself to his feet, gasping. "Status," he managed. Eris's voice came through the intercom, shaky but alive. "We're in one piece, I think. The drive is offline, the shields are gone, and half our sensors are blind, but we're here, wherever here is." "Elara," Cruz asked. There was a pause. Then, from the engineering bay, a sound that Cruz had never heard from his captain before. Laughter. It was not a happy sound. It was raw and broken and edged with something that might have been madness, but it was alive. "We made it," Elara's voice came through, thin and exhausted. "We actually made it." On the unwavering account, the 3-second blind spot cleared. Factor Resh stared at the empty space where the human ship had been. Its black eyes, usually unreadable, widened by a fraction. The chamber was silent except for the hum of the quantum mind, processing data at speeds no organic brain could follow. "Report," Resh said, its voice flat. The quantum mind responded through the ship's interface. The words appeared as text on Resh's retinal display, cold and precise. Fold space anchor destabilized. Target vessel escaped via a non-standard dimensional breach. The event profile matches a forced rupture of local spacetime. Residual signature detected. "Signature analysis," Resh demanded. There was a pause. The quantum mind, for the first time in its existence, hesitated. "Signature is non-standard. It does not match any known fold drive profile. The energy pattern is emotional." Resh turned away from the empty space. "Explain." The human pilot channeled a negative affective state through the neural mesh into the drive system. The resulting jump was not a fold. It was a rupture. The vessel forced its way through reality by overwhelming the anchor's stability field with concentrated psychological output. Resh's hands, which had remained still throughout the negotiation, began to tremble. That is impossible. The data is conclusive. For a long moment, Resh said nothing. It simply stood there, staring at the point in space where the Lodestone had vanished. The graveyard of 200 ships drifted below, a silent testament to Praxis' power. And yet one small, crude vessel had escaped. Final assessment, Resh said. The human species, full analysis. The quantum mind processed. Its calculations spanned the entire database of Praxis intelligence, cross-referencing every observation, every scan, every interaction with the beings who called themselves humanity. Then it delivered its verdict. Variance infinite, threat projection unquantifiable, recommended action reevaluation. Resh closed its eyes. For the first time in 2 centuries, the Praxis Merchant League faced something they could not price. The Lodestone limped through the final transit corridor like a wounded animal, its hull scarred, its systems howling in protest. The fold space drive had overloaded and then collapsed, leaving them with only the backup sublight engines and a navigation computer that kept recalculating the same error. Commander Elara Vess sat in the command chair, her hands resting on the armrests, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The neural mesh had left a phantom ache behind her eyes, a constant low thrum that she suspected would never fully fade. Bennett Cruz stood at tactical, his jaw tight, his fingers hovering over controls that no longer responded to anything but basic maneuvering. He had not slept. None of them had. Aris Tam appeared at Elara's side, a datapad in his hand, his expression hollow but precise. He spoke quietly. There is a neutral outpost ahead, the Polaran Station. It is not aligned with the Praxis Merchant League. They accept all vessels. Elara nodded. She did not ask if the Praxis were following. She knew they were not. The signal she had sent, the raw grief translated into a negative waveform, had done something the Praxis could not parse. They had not pursued. They had instead gone silent. She said, broadcast our logs on an open channel. Full spectrum, no encryption. Cruz turned, his eyes widening. Commander, that is every tactical weakness we have, every system failure, every reading from the mesh. Elara looked at him. Her voice was flat, worn, but certain. That is the point. They need to see what we did, not how we did it, that we did it. Aris hesitated, then tapped his console. The transmission began, a raw stream of sensor data, audio logs, and the faint, distorted echo of Elara's scream as it passed through the fold space drive. The scream that had torn a hole in the universe. The Lodestone drifted into the shadow of the Polaran Station, a vast, spoked wheel of burnished metal and crystal, its docking rings open and waiting. The station's traffic control sent a single, cautious hail. A voice, modulated and flat, spoke. Vessel Lodestone, you are cleared for docking bay 7. Your transmission is being analyzed. Stand by. Elara closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the ache behind her eyes pulse. She opened them again and stood. She said, take us in. The crew of the Lodestone did not sleep that night. They sat in the common mess, a small room with a table that had been bolted to the deck for 30 years, and they talked in low voices. Cruz kept checking his console, expecting an ambush. Aris ran diagnostic after diagnostic, trying to understand what Elara had done to the drive. And Elara, still wearing the same jacket she had shed in the engineering bay, sat at the head of the table and said nothing. Outside, the galaxy began to stir. The Polaran Station was a crossroads. Ships from a dozen species passed through its corridors daily, exchanging goods, gossip, and data. The Lodestone's logs spread like fire through dry grass. The Tidesong, an aquatic species who had long ago accepted their place as a quiet, client race of the Praxis, received the transmission through their embassy relays. Their sensory arrays, tuned to pressure and vibration rather than light, picked up the echo of Elara's emotional broadcast. It was not a sound they could describe in words. It was a shape, a pressure, a breaking wave of sorrow and defiance. The eldest among them, a being called Speaker of Deep Currents, floated in her chamber and felt the signal pass through her. She had not felt anything like it in 300 years. She turned to her aide and spoke, her voice carrying through the water. What is this? The aide, a younger Tidesong, shimmered with confusion. It is a human speaker. They fought the Praxis. They escaped. Speaker of Deep Currents did not answer immediately. She drifted, letting the shape of the human emotion settle in her mind. It was raw, It was ugly. It was alive. She said, finally, I had forgotten what hope felt like. The Varath, territorial and scarred from centuries of skirmishes with the Praxis, intercepted the logs through a stolen relay. Their queen, a massive chitinous being surrounded by her court, watched the data unfold on a crystalline screen. She clicked her mandibles, a sound of irritation, and beneath it, something else. Her tactical advisor, a smaller Varath with a missing limb, spoke. The humans are weak. Their technology is primitive, but this signal, it was not a weapon we recognize. The queen turned her multifaceted eyes toward the screen. It is not a weapon at all. It is a symptom. A species that can produce this, that can weaponize their own pain, is not something to be dismissed. She fell silent. The Varath court waited. Outside, the signal from the human vessel continued to spread, a ripple of raw emotion moving through the galactic network. It carried no threat, no demand, no negotiation. It carried only a single, unmistakable truth. The Praxis Merchant League had met the one thing they could not buy or break. A species that had learned to scream in ways that shattered the universe. And they were coming.